Hello, everybody.
Hello there. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom indeed.
Y'all doing okay today? Holding up all right? Enjoying the beautiful sunshine, I
It's
hope?
pretty out there today. Hope it
It
is where
is.
you are.
No kidding. No kidding. But it
Yes.
is good to see all of you. Why don't we get started since we're on a very important subject tonight?
Yes.
And we're going to be in Romans chapter 11. So if y'all want to join us with your scriptures and look up there so you can follow along with us. But Vicky, if you want to say the Omer count and such.
Sure. Today is day 1 of week 4 of the counting of the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kitshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivanu al shefarat ha'omer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us about the counting of the Omer. Amen.
Okay. So here we are at the end of the day. I hope
I
you
like
were,
Diana's. Howdy.
yeah. At the end of the day, here we are. Day 1 will be coming down at sunset
Yes.
tonight. Remember, the day for the Jewish people always starts, at sundown, a very definitive marker for things. And so this has been a day of rest. We had a Shabbat service, a Sabbath service earlier in the afternoon, and it's been fun. We had a good discussion on what it means to love your neighbor and how that connects over to the account of the Good Samaritan and such, but also where the second greatest commandment comes from. Where is that found? Because Yeshua was not just making up a new concept; he was actually quoting from the scriptures. He was quoting from the Torah back in Leviticus chapter 19. So, encourage y'all to go back and watch that. It's a long service because we had showed all the music and the readings and things like that. But if you wanted to join us in that and just enjoy, but just get to the teaching, there's all sorts of different ways you can participate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, there is.
All right. So we are in Romans chapter 11, and backing up just a little bit, because remember, Romans 9 through 11 are really the heart of his book about the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles in a lot of ways, and about how both are included in God's plan. So he was having to say things to both the Jewish people who couldn't understand why the Gentiles were included at all,
Right.
and he was having to come to terms with and come to understand with why are not more Jewish people embracing Messiah. So both of those concepts, he was struggling with trying to find meaning in. And he was giving us some various answers, because this is also the heart of refuting replacement theology. Even though they often use Paul to try to establish replacement theology, if they really were reading through these passages, there's no way that they could say that God has rejected his people, that he has done and cast them aside, because he comes right out and says that in verse 1, God has not rejected his people, has he? In spite of the fact that there was a great rejection, in spite of the fact that the majority of them were not seeing and recognizing Yeshua as Messiah, he was asking that question. He was asking that question himself. And his answer was, may it never be. I mean, that is so not what's happening. And so he is addressing those types of issues, and he's addressing what is God hoping to accomplish in their rejection.
Yeah.
What is he doing? What does he hope to gain by giving them blindness, by giving them a spirit of stupor, as he says in verse 8? Okay, if God is giving that to him, then he must have a reason. What is that possible reason that he's going to do something with it? And we get to that in verse 11. And he says, so again, answering that question of, okay, have they stumbled? Have they rejected him so far that God is not going to reach out to them or save them anymore? And did they not stumble so as to fall, did they? They did not stumble so as to fall, did they? May it never be. But by their false step, salvation has come to the Gentiles. That's his reasoning.
Yes.
I mean, that's what God is doing in all of this. by their false step, salvation has come to the Gentiles. And then with salvation being given to the Gentiles, it's going to also accomplish something towards the Jewish people.
Yes.
And that's going to provoke them to jealousy. And it's going to provoke them to jealousy so that they will do what? That they'll embrace Messiah.
Sure. Yes.
So they're rejecting Messiah causes gives the opportunity for Gentiles to believe, and Gentiles believing makes them want the Messiah. That's the way it's supposed to work. So now if their transgression leads to riches for the world and their loss, riches for the Gentiles, then how much more their fullness? And this is a fullness in the sense of that, how did I put it this afternoon? I just totally blanked on that.
Well, it's the fullness of their faith.
Yes.
It's taking that biblical Jewish faith and applying Messiah to it. Mm-hmm. There's fullness in that.
And the full keeping of what the Torah and what their walk with God was supposed to be all along.
Yes.
They all along they're supposed to be the firstborn. All along they're supposed to be the light to the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. And all along, at various stages they've been unwilling to fulfill the role that they've been given because of the stubbornness of their hearts and such as that, and various reasons. But he always still preserves the remnant.
Very much so.
So in this moment, or in these moments when it seems like they're again missing out on their true calling, he is saying, well, that might be the way it is right now, but God is going to do something more. He is going to reach out and restore them again. So,
we talk about, that things kind of split in 70 AD, but it wasn't that clean cut. The split between Jew and Gentile at the fall of the temple, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the destruction of Jerusalem with the Bar Kokhba revolt in about 130 to 135, it wasn't that clear cut. There's actually archaeological evidence in the Galilee that actually Orthodox Jews and Messianic Jews continued to live together in the same communities, going to the same synagogue for centuries. Mm-hmm. And they know this, when I say archaeological evidence, is because they have found tombs where there is archaeological evidence that Orthodox Jews and even Messianic Jews are buried in the same tombs. And they know that by the structure of their tomb, how they would structure their particular personal...
Or decorate.
Right. Yeah. So they're in the same tombs, which meant they were living together, they were family, and so the breakaway between Jews believing in Messiah and it just being a Gentile thing is not as clean cut as we like to think of it.
And we also know, that when the Sabbath was being changed, by the early church in the 300s and so, mm-hmm. That there were still many believers around the Mediterranean world that were keeping the Shabbat, yes. keeping the Sabbath. And so it was not a universal we're all on Sunday type of thing either. So they had to, in those decisions, when they made those decisions, they were declaring that Sunday is going to be the new, the official day of worship for the church. But they were also banning and outlawing and making it illegal to keep the Shabbat.
Right.
And if it was universal, if everybody was keeping the Sunday and nobody was keeping Sabbath anymore, there'd be no reason to make a law saying you have to stop keeping Sabbath. So even at the 300s, there were still a lot of people who were practicing a messianic, a Sabbath keeping, Torah keeping schedule with life. So anyway, that's if their transgression, of the Jews rejecting Messiah, mm-hmm. leads to riches for the world, their loss, riches for the Gentiles, then how much more will, when they come back, when they fully get it, when they fully embrace Messiah and recognize him for who he is, boy, that's going to be something to see. Mm-hmm. And Paul is longing for that day. That is his heart. His heart is for the Jewish people to fully and completely embrace Yeshua as Messiah. And of course, if that's, Paul is writing scripture here, that means he's inspired by the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And if he is inspired by the Holy Spirit to write these things down, then whose heart is also being revealed in all of this?
Oh, God's.
This is God's heart. Yeah, it's God's heart to have the fullness of the Jewish people embrace Messiah. He says, but I am speaking to you who are Gentiles in verse 13, Romans 11:13. Insofar as I am an apostle, an emissary to the Gentiles, I spotlight my ministry. I'm going to put the biggest spotlight on you and the ministry that I have, going towards you as I can, because guess what? It's going to tick some of them off.
Yeah.
It's going to make them mad. How dare I, take the Messiah to you Gentiles? And then guess what? It's on. We're going to have to address this issue of the identity of Messiah. And guess what? I'm going to prove it to him. He wants them to be jealous of the work that's going on among the Gentiles, because he wants the opportunity to prove to them that Yeshua is the Messiah. And the more jealous they are, boy, he's like, man, the stronger, the bigger platform I've got. It's what's that, the line that says, all press is good press, kind of a thing, whether it's good or bad. Hey, at least they're talking about me.
Yeah.
So I spotlight my ministry, if somehow, verse 14, I might provoke to jealousy my own flesh and blood, his own people, and save some of them. For if their rejection leads to the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? And that's the future. That's the anticipation. The life from the dead is the hope of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. When we start seeing the people being raised to life, then we know that Messiah has come.
And it's not just the physical resurrection either.
No, that's true.
It's the spiritual resurrection of the body of believers. It is our faith coming back to life, and coming to life like never before. When all of a sudden you have the right ingredients in your faith, everything just falls into place and everything just makes so much more sense. You may have believed something your whole life, but now you know why you believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to me just how much the Jewish people, when they come to faith in Messiah, how much they really are bringing into the faith, or I should say back into the faith.
Mm-hmm.
Because again,
it
started out that way.
Yeah, these are things we should have been maintaining, should
Yes.
have known all along, that decisions were made again centuries ago, and we're responsible for what we know. We can't, we are responsible for what we're taught. And so many times that it's the teachers who are held to greater account.
Yeah.
If they're teaching and holding back the truth. But so these are things that we should have had as a part of our lives as believers all along. And we've been missing out on.
And that's not to say that, all pastors have been doing that, because they've been teaching what they were taught, what they believed to be true, what they knew.
And that's not malicious. That's not intentionally deceptive. But what's the thing, when you tell a lie often enough, pretty soon everybody believes it's the truth. And so when we're talking centuries, generations down the line from decisions that were made, we've stopped questioning the decision.
Yeah. We didn't even know the decision was made in a lot of cases.
And that's kind of like how things are right now with the whole virus thing. You have the narrative is so set and established in the media or in certain circles that if you challenge one little point of it, it's how dare you even ask that question? You must want people to die.
Yeah.
Or, and it's like that in some ways when we approach even church history and theology and decisions that were made so long ago. If you question those decisions, then all of a sudden, then you're calling into question the faith of everybody who held that position. Not doing that at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. So.
Not turning into a heretic either.
Yeah. So their acceptance brought life from the dead.
Yes.
And as you were saying, the Jewish people, when they come to know Messiah in our age, again, there are more Jewish people coming to faith in Messiah, Yeshua, now than since the first century of the church.
Right.
And they're bringing back with them this knowledge and this vibrancy and this life to the scriptures that just makes it stand out all the more. And it's exciting.
Because they're excited.
Yeah.
They finally realize who their Messiah is, and everything they were brought up to believe and do finally makes sense.
Yeah. The missing puzzle piece has finally fallen into place, and it's like, wow.
Because I remember years ago, I did a conference on the Jewish wedding. And one thing I would say over and over again was the Jewish wedding is our faith. It's like, they fit like a glove. It's our faith. The only thing they're missing is the proper bridegroom. That's it. But once you put the proper bridegroom in place, everything else makes sense. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't even know the steps to the Jewish wedding. You know, we may have the proper bridegroom, but we don't know where to place him in, you know, in the theology and in the faith that God had established all the way back with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then with Moses, with the nation. Mm-hmm. Right? So, yeah.
So all that to say, that catches us up from last night.
Yeah, that catches us up. So now we're on verse 16, okay? Starting in verse 16 of chapter 11. If the first fruit is holy, so is the whole batch of dough. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. All right, so here we go.
Who's the first
Who's
fruit?
the root? Who's the branches?
Well, who's the first fruit?
What's the tree? Let's define the whole tree here for a minute.
Okay.
Okay? What is the tree? What's the tree?
Well, the tree, as I understand it, is of Israel. It's
Israel.
The whole.
Israel is the tree.
In a lot of ways, it's the whole plan and purpose of God and redemption through the Jewish people.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
It's the whole redemption process of which He started with the Jewish people.
So, if Israel is the tree, what's the root?
Well, the root is that foundation of His Word. It's the root of Messiah.
Yes.
The root is the Messiah because He is from that promise of the seed, from that promise of Messiah has grown this people. If He had no intention of ever sending a Messiah, then there would be no need for the tree.
Right.
And so the root is Messiah.
Yeah, I like the way you put it because it's also His Word, right? Because it's in His Word that we learn the need for a Messiah, right? And of course, Yeshua is the Word.
Yep.
Right? The Word became flesh. So the Word of God and Yeshua, that's the root. The tree, the whole tree is Israel. The branches, the natural branches. What are the natural branches?
Well, the natural branches, I would think, are like each individual person. Is that what we're thinking of?
Individual Jewish people.
Individual Jewish people.
Right?
Those are the natural branches.
Right? Yeah. So now we've got the root, we've got the branches, and we've defined the tree itself. Verse 17. But if some of the branches, those individual Jewish people, were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, who are the wild olives?
Wild olives must be the Gentiles, an individual Gentile person.
Yes. Were grafted in among them. So the wild is grafted into the tree of Israel. And become a partaker of the root, who is
Messiah.
The Word and Messiah, right? Remember, He's King of the Jews, right? He's not King of the Gentiles. He's the King of the Jews. He's the King of Israel.
The promise,
right?
The Davidic king. He's the fulfillment of that Davidic promise.
Right. He becomes King of the nations because we are grafted in to Israel. And He is King of Israel. All right. So we're grafted in among them and become partakers of the root of the olive tree with its richness. The olive tree, Israel, has its own richness that we as Gentiles didn't have before.
Nope.
We were not partakers of that richness. We weren't looking for the Messiah.
And God
Right?
God had invested in Israel. He had blessed them. He had given them all things. And he had said, I'm going to bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. They had received the promises. I mean, he talked about that in chapter 9. Theirs is the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the Torah, the temple service, the promises, the patriarchs, and through them comes the Messiah. So Israel has a great richness of faith.
Yes.
That we should all want to be a part of.
Okay, so now we've been grafted into that root of that olive tree with its richness. And then he says this, verse 18, do not boast against the branches.
Why would he need to say that?
Don't boast against the branches.
Why would he need
Not
to
even
say
the
that?
ones that have been broken off. Why would he need to say that? You think that was already happening?
Mm-hmm. There was already this tension and this hostility going on between the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers and the Jewish people, especially the Jewish people who didn't believe, because those were oftentimes the ones that didn't believe in Messiah were the ones that were not rejecting, or that were not the Jewish people who were not believers in Messiah were the ones giving the Gentiles the hardest time for coming in.
Right.
And so the Gentiles were saying, yes, we accept Messiah. Yes, we believe. Let us join you in fellowship. And even some of the Jewish believers were struggling with coming to terms with that. Mm-hmm. But especially the unbelieving Jewish people were like, no way, you can't come in here. And
remember, too, this letter was written at a time to believers in Rome when the Jewish believers, when the Jews themselves were actually coming back into Rome.
Yes.
Remember, Claudius had kicked all the Jews out of Rome at one time. That's when both
the Messianic Jews and the normal. I'm trying to think of the word here.
Orthodox.
The unbelieving
Orthodox
Messiah.
Jews. So but Claudius had kicked all the Jews out, and now the Jews have been given permission to come back in. Well, while they were gone, the Gentile believers had
had to take over.
Pick up the,
They had to start doing the work. They had to start doing the leadership. They had to start doing all of those things. But they didn't grow up with this.
No. And now all of a sudden the Jews, and including the Jewish believers, are coming back, and the Jewish believers are wanting to fall back into their position within the congregation of believers, and it's causing some tension between the Gentile believers and the Jewish believers. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, there is some boasting going on. There's some arrogance going on. There's just that, again, that tension, that strife of who's going to be in charge, who's going to do what, who's going to say what, and whose faith is this really?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And even Yeshua warned about that, didn't he? He said the Gentiles
yes.
like to or love to lord it over.
Yes.
I mean, that's something that Yeshua says the Gentiles are known for, of wanting to take over and take charge.
Yeah. After all, this was Rome, not Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Right? All right, so he says, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, it is not you who support the root, but the root supports you. You don't support the word of God. You don't support Yeshua. Yeshua and the word support you. And Yeshua and the word both came through the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. Remember, Yeshua himself said to the Samaritan woman at the well that salvation is of the Jews. And that is never to be forgotten.
Yeah. So you may think that you're the foundation. You may think you're in charge.
You may think you have all this figured out.
And he's like, no. You're not the be all end all of this program.
Right.
It's not you who support the root. You do not make Messiah. Messiah makes you. The only basis that you have for even being a part of the discussion is that Messiah has included you.
Amen.
And that's just what we have to understand.
That's right. All right. So, verse 19. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. True enough.
So that's the lawyer in Paul anticipating their objection or anticipating their statement.
Right. So they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. You've been grafted in because of your faith, not because you're so much better than they are, not because of what you do, not because of what you think, not because of your philosophy. Nothing you do, nothing you think you understand makes you worthy of being grafted in their place. Messiah is the only thing you have. So your faith is all you have. That's why you've been grafted in. He says, do not be arrogant, but fear. Verse 21, for if God did not spare the natural branches, those Jewish people who did not believe in Yeshua, neither will he spare you. So don't be arrogant in this newfound faith you have. You think you got this all figured out, and you think you know more than these Jewish people now. No. And church, the answer is still no.
And we think about it in like this, that being a part of the people of God is not an automatic.
Right.
Again, that was one of the problems that Yeshua and Paul were having to deal with even among the Jewish people. Just because you're a Jewish person, just because you're a part of the covenants, just because you are the people of God, circumcised on the 8th day, your tribe and all those things, as he said to Nicodemus, doesn't mean you still don't need to be born again. Right. Doesn't mean you still don't have to choose this day whom you're going to serve. Even though you've got all that stuff going for you, you still have to come to Messiah. That's what Yeshua was telling Nicodemus. And here's the same thing. Look, okay, yeah, you've been grafted in, but guess what? If you don't stay in that, if you don't abide in him, if you don't remain in that, but you become just as haughty and superior and thinking that you've got it all, then guess what? Then how are you any different?
Well, isn't that kind of what he tells the church of Ephesus in the book of Revelation? That he'll take away their lampstand. Right? In other words, he'll take away their church. Well, guess what? There is no church in Ephesus today because the entire city is gone. So yeah, that lampstand of Ephesus was taken away. All right? So notice then the kindness and severity of God. Severity towards those who fell, but God's kindness toward you, if you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. So those natural branches can be grafted back into their tree. It's their tree, right?
The tree is Israel.
Right. And this is a special tree. Like Kelly was saying, we're about to get into that. I don't want to say too much yet because we're about to get there. But yeah, they can be grafted back in today. And the truth of the matter is, we are seeing the day Paul was waiting for.
Yep.
Paul wanted that to happen in his lifetime. Paul wanted that to happen in his lifetime, but it didn't. It didn't. Instead, you had the fall of the temple. Instead, you had the Bar Kokhba revolt and people believing that he was the Messiah. And then them getting kicked out of Jerusalem. That's what followed immediately after Paul's lifetime for the Jewish people. But the day that Paul was looking forward to, the Jewish people being grafted back in, that we are seeing today. Since 1967, since Israel got Jerusalem back in its hands, more Jewish people have come to faith in Yeshua the Messiah than since the first century. And so since then, I was born in 1967. So within my lifetime, these Jews have come in more and more and more than since the first century. And they are bringing that richness with them. They are bringing that life with them. So if all of this seems like, well, how come we never heard this before? Well, guess what? There's a reason for that. Because the Jewish people were needed to bring it. And now they're bringing it because they're coming to faith in Yeshua. They're being grafted back into their tree. And for them, it's a very natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
And this also, going with that idea of replacement theology, which is what we've talked about on other nights and such. If God has cast the Jewish people off and he is done and the covenant with them is broken and it's now just for us as the believing community, then why is this happening at all? Why is God still fulfilling promises? Why is he even preserving the Jewish people at all? If he's done with them, then they should no longer exist as a people, but they do. And if he's done with them, why is he bringing them back to the land? If he's done with them, why are more of them being grafted back into their tree by believing in Messiah? See, everything that is here that Paul is looking forward to, everything that we are seeing happening in our lifetime is proof that he is not done with them.
No.
And that there are more things to come.
Matter of fact, there's a great revival going on amongst the Jewish people. The truth of the matter is the Gentile church just doesn't pay a lot of attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's keep going. Verse 24, for if you were cut out of that which by nature is a wild olive tree, we were from the wild, right? And grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? That olive tree, Israel, God cultivated that tree. He cared for that tree. He loved that tree. He would discipline, he would prune that tree, but he cared for that tree. He poured everything he had into that tree.
Yes,
His son came through that tree. And Paul here is saying, look, they're the natural branches. It's their cultivated tree.
He is going to bring them back.
Paul in Ephesians says that there's one faith. Biblically speaking, there is only one faith that the Bible talks about. One. And it is biblical Judaism. It is the faith that God started and cultivated, starting with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and going into Moses and into David. That is the one faith that God put in place.
One faith, one Lord, one baptism, one God and Father of all.
Yes.
And at that time, when Paul wrote that, the idea or the concept of Christianity as we understand
did not exist.
Was not there. Did not exist. We were still a combination of Jew and Gentile underneath the umbrella of the synagogue. That's the one faith that he's talking about in that passage, because again, the New Testament, as we know it, didn't even exist yet. Right. Scripture hadn't been written yet. The Gospels hadn't been written yet.
Right.
So when he talks about one faith, one Lord, one baptism, it's this Jewish foundation.
It's this cultivated tree. Okay, that God has cared for all along. So they're able to be grafted back into that cultivated tree. And we are seeing that, people. That is exactly the day in which we live.
And that's exciting.
That should thrill us, that we are getting to live in the days of fulfilled prophecy. The days that the prophets and the apostles long to see is our generation's sight. Their faith is our sight. That should thrill us.
Yes, it should.
Yes, that may mean that there will be some hard times at some point. Maybe in our lifetime, maybe not.
And maybe
only
there'll
God
be...
knows. But we are seeing some of the things they wanted to see happen.
Yes. And the lesson out of Romans is that these things are not supposed to create tension.
No.
Between the Jew and the Gentile believing community. The Gentiles need to know that the Jewish people, in embracing all these things and bringing all these things back, are going to be bringing a level of understanding of leadership, of things, of what they're supposed to be fulfilling and what they're supposed to have been fulfilling all along. We're gonna sadly gonna push back against.
Yeah.
And Paul is writing all of this, all this arguing, all this tension, all this stuff needs to not be the focus. Messiah needs to be our focus. And so he goes on in that passage, the natural branches are going to be grafted into their own tree. This should not come as a shock, as a surprise. And in fact, it's going to be more natural than we as Gentiles are, really.
Very much so.
Verse 25 of Romans 11, he says, "For I do not want you, brothers and sisters, to be ignorant of this mystery." I want you to know what's going on. I want you to know what this tension is. I want you to know why more Jewish people are not embracing the faith. And it's not because they're inferior or they're rejected by God, which is what was being said and what the church has said for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "I don't want you to be ignorant of why this is happening, of this mystery, lest you be wise in your own eyes."
Oh, haven't we done that?
Oh, man. That you think you've got it all figured out, and that you think that you're just better than they are, smarter than they are, or have more faith than they do. And boy, that's what happened.
And yeah, I mean, that arrogance that Paul warned about
Is what replacement theology
we have taken on the very thing he warned us against.
Is the foundation of that replacement theology is anti-Semitism and the arrogance that Paul is warning against.
Yes.
But he says, "I don't want you to be wise in your own eyes." You need to understand why they're not receiving it right immediately. He says that a partial hardening has come upon Israel. He's acknowledging it. It's a partial hardening from who? Where is this? What's the source of this partial hardening?
God himself.
Yeah, he already answered that earlier in the chapter, that God gave them the spirit of stupor back in verse 8. That by their false step, God is able to bring salvation to the Gentiles. All of those things he's already established. He says, this partial hardening has come upon Israel until... What does until mean? What does until imply? Is until mean it's forever and permanent? This hardening or this blindness
Partial
that's there?
Yes.
It's not even a full hardness. It's not every Jewish person is finding this hardness. It's only partial. And it's only temporary.
Yes.
That's what we need to understand. That's what Paul is trying to tell them. Guys, it's not all of them. And guys, it's not forever. And you'd better be ready for it when it starts to happen. That's what he's telling the Gentiles. He's saying, it's not all of them, and it's not forever, so watch for it. These are also supposed to be signs for us. The things that we are seeing in our day are supposed to be a testimony to us. Just as our faith and our interest in the Torah is supposed to be a testimony to them. So a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way, all Israel will be saved.
So that fullness of the Gentiles is that interest that the Gentiles have in Torah that you were just mentioning. Right? That's our fullness. Coming to understand the feast, coming to care about the feast, coming to care about Shabbat, coming into the faith with more interest in the actual things that God had laid down from the beginning. That's our fullness. It's our faith coming to maturity.
Some of your translations may put that in there where it says that a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And they want to turn that into a numbers game, as if, okay, well, as long as there's more Gentiles to be saved, then this other stuff can't happen yet. And Israel's only going to be saved once all of us Gentiles have gotten saved.
Well, then there's a problem there, because Jews are getting saved. Does that mean every Gentile since the first Jew started getting saved again in 1967, that those conversions are no longer real? Well, that would mean mine, and that would mean yours. That would mean our children's. right? No, Gentiles have continued to get saved, and Jews are getting saved.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So its fullness here is not just about a numbers game.
No.
Fullness is about a maturity of faith or a hunger for the faith, a return, in a lot of ways, through our theology, through our practice of distancing ourselves from everything Jewish, the anti-Semitic nature of the early church. It's like, okay, we've been grafted into the olive tree as the wild olive branch, but we want to deny that we're olives.
That's what that's like.
I mean, we're not really a part of that tree. We're still.
He grafted us into another tree.
We're trying to deny the
Christian
nature.
tree and the Jewish tree. They're two separate trees. No.
Yeah. Nope, that's
They're
not
not
at all. So the fullness that it's talking about is when Gentiles come to understand who we are, what our role is, and what we're supposed to be doing. Primarily, or one of our primary roles as Gentile believers is to provoke Israel to jealousy. And how do we do that? How do we as Gentiles provoke Israel to jealousy when we persecute them? How do we provoke Israel to jealousy for Messiah when we reject everything that makes Messiah Jewish?
We call them Christ killers.
Yeah. How do we provoke them to jealousy in any of those any of the things that we have done within Christianity to remove that Jewish foundation, that biblical foundation? They're talking the feasts, you're talking the Sabbath. We've added our own day, we've added our own holidays. They don't, there's so many things about Jesus that they don't recognize anymore.
They find completely foreign.
Yeah. And so, I've heard conversations say that many Jewish people in Israel, they'll be happy to talk to you about Jesus because that's that pagan God that you Gentiles believe in. And they're more than happy because they know that's not what they're looking for.
Yeah.
But you start talking to them about Yeshua and you start talking about him in context of the feast, then a lot of times there's a pushback. There's even an anger in response. They don't want to talk about him, because he reminds them too much of who he really is. And so our goal or our purpose as a Gentile is to provoke Israel to jealousy. Jealousy for their own faith, jealousy for their own Messiah. Mm-hmm. And we don't do that so long as we make it we're the Christians over here and there's the Jews over there. We will fail in that
role. Or if we want nothing to do with the Torah,
yeah,
because that's for the Jews and we're not them.
Yeah. Yeah. We will not be able to make them jealous so long as we reject Torah. So, and that's part of the fullness. It's when we start figuring that out, which is again what we're starting to see in the last however long this has been going on. God has been working 30, 40 years.
Let's just say about 50.
Okay. So we're getting into this in the last 10 years, mm-hmm. but it's been an ongoing thing. Mm-hmm. So when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way, all Israel will be saved. The whole tree will be saved. We get so wrapped up in all Israel as in thinking, well, that's all the Jews. And that's not what he's talking about. What is all Israel? All Israel is the whole tree, with Messiah as the root. All Israel is the natural branches and the wild olive branches, all of them being gathered together at the coming of Messiah. That's all Israel being saved. As it is written, the deliverer shall come out of Zion. He shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. We're still waiting for a complete fulfillment of all of that, right?
Yes, and we say that about all Israel. What you just said is very true, and yet the other is also true. Because when he does return and they look upon the one whom they pierced, everyone who is there in that day, every single Jewish person, everything will finally click for them and they will believe.
And where is that passage where it says they will look on
That's
the one they
Zechariah
appeared?
chapter 12.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They will believe. God will pour out on them a spirit of grace and supplication on that day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, both are true. Both are true.
Mm-hmm. So verse 28, concerning the good news, they are hostile for your sake. Right now, there's hostility. Right now, they are rejecting Yeshua as Messiah. And you Gentiles, you're benefiting from that.
And it wasn't just Messiah they were rejecting. It was the kingdom itself.
Yes.
They liked things the way they were. They understood them. It made sense to them. To bring the Messiah in would mess everything up.
Well, Messiah had to come in a certain way to do a certain thing.
The way they wanted it done.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, they even rejected that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he literally, with the triumphal entry, he was giving the leadership of Israel the opportunity to at least recognize him as the Messiah. And they refused to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You hear people say that, okay, if they would have recognized him, what then? Would we have gone into the kingdom? Well, if that would have been the case, then there wouldn't have been the last 2,000 years, and none of us would have been saved because none of us would have been born.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense. But this is bigger than we think.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is the good news of the kingdom. It's not just Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. That is part of the good news.
An essential part.
A very essential part. But the actual wholeness of the good news is the gospel of the kingdom, that the kingdom is coming.
Mm-hmm.
The king is coming. He's going to sit on his throne. Right? He's going to rule. And Israel will be restored to the place she was always meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
So
yes.
Concerning the good news, they are hostile for your sake. That's what you're seeing right now.
Yes.
That's what you Gentiles are benefiting from, that reality. But he says, but concerning chosenness, they are loved on account of the fathers. Does it say they were loved? Is it past tense?
No, it is present.
It is present.
They are loved.
So even in the fact that they are rejecting Messiah and they're not recognizing him in his first coming, are they still loved?
Absolutely.
Are they still chosen?
Absolutely.
Yes, that has not changed. That reality has not been negated at all. And so much of church history, church theology, replacement theology is built on that very assumption that he's done with them. He rejects them. He hates them. And we should hate them too. That's what has been taught.
That's
over
what
the
led to
centuries.
the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. So, but concerning chosenness, they are loved on account of the fathers. And it's the fathers in the sense of, because that's the promise. The promises and the covenants were made to the fathers, and God is going to keep his word. To say he has rejected his people, to say that he is done with them and no longer wants them or is no longer loves them, is to say that he is breaking his word and he is breaking his covenant. And he will not in any way do that.
Because if he can break that covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then he can break covenant with you and me.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not going to do that.
Yeah, and that's where verse 29 comes in. They are loved on account of the fathers, for the gifts and the calling of God are, what's the word there?
Irrevocable.
Irrevocable. Unchanging. This is not going to be
take
broken.
It back.
Yeah. He wasn't crossing his fingers.
Yeah, no, not going to take it back. And he remembers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He still knows Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
How did Yeshua put it?
He's the God of the living, not the dead.
I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Present tense.
Yes.
He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So that kind of gives you the picture of if God were actually considering this, that I'm thinking of dismissing these Jewish people and getting rid of them and breaking my covenant with them. Abraham would be right there to say, excuse me, no, I'm right here.
You made that promise to me.
I'm right here. Yeah. I'm going to hold you to it.
And over and over again in the Torah, it makes a statement about he will never leave them nor forsake them.
Mm-hmm.
We think that's a Christian concept because of Yeshua, because of Jesus, but it's not. That promise was actually given to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he is king of Israel.
We are brought under that and included in that.
Grafted into that tree.
And into that promise.
Yes.
So the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. For just as you once were disobedient to God, you Gentiles especially were once disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience. You've been given this opportunity to believe in Messiah, to come in greater numbers and such like that because of their rejection. In like manner, these also have now been disobedient. Yeah. And, God reached out to you as a Gentile while you were disobedient. What makes you think he's not going to reach out to them when they've been disobedient?
When they've got the covenants, when they've got the promises, when they've got the patriarchs, right? Yeah.
So, just as you once were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience, in like manner, these also have now been disobedient, with the result that, because of the mercy shown to you Gentiles, they also may receive mercy. I mean, if he can show mercy to you, guess what? He can show mercy to them.
I will have compassion on whom I have compassion,
mm-hmm.
and I will show mercy to whom I show mercy.
Mm-hmm.
These things are the decisions of God. They're not for you and I to judge.
Or second guess.
Yes.
Or draw arrogant conclusions from.
Yeah, no. God had a plan in it all. He wanted to make the tree beautiful, and he wanted the tree to include both cultivated and wild branches.
Mm-hmm.
He had something in mind from the beginning. It's like an artist, right? An artist knows exactly what they want their masterpiece to look like in their head. But over time, you may come back at different times when they're painting their beautiful picture, and it may look horrible to you, but it's not the finished product. Come back when they're done, and there's amazement.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, when I was here the last time, there was just a couple of a couple of colors on there, and
it was
everything
a mess.
was smeared over. It was a mess, and how did you get it so beautiful?
I mean, I liked watching that artist on TV with the one with the big hair. What was his name?
Bob Ross.
Bob Ross.
Let's give it a friend.
in 30 minutes, you could see him turn, or was it 30 minutes or an hour?
I can't remember.
In a short amount of time, when he starts out, he's got a roughly a blank page or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And he just gets up with these brushes, these big wide brushes, and just goes. And it's like
a mess.
Okay, what are you going to do with that? And you come back a few minutes later and you see some more things, and it still doesn't look all that great. And then you come back at the end of the program, and all of a sudden there's this vibrancy of the layers of color. Yes. And layers of the mountains and the trees with all their friends and all those things. It's like, man, how did he do that? How did he get that great picture out of what looked like a complete mess when he started?
And God's a better artist than that.
Yes, he is.
Far better artist than that. And he knows exactly what he wants his tree and his people to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And he has headed us in that direction. We just have to be humble. We have to be have a soft heart that's willing to be molded,
mm-hmm.
to become what it is he wants to shape us into.
And to be aware of what is his goal.
Yeah.
Where is he taking his people? What is the kingdom going to look like? Yeah, that's one thing that we talk about on Wednesday nights.
That's why we're talking about the kingdom, because it's important to know where you're going.
Yeah, because if you know your destination, if you know where you're supposed to go, then we as his people, as his children, we can start taking steps to get there to that goal.
Yes.
If you're driving to Knoxville, it doesn't make sense to take the exit that's going to take you to Johnson City. It just doesn't. So if you know that this is your destination, and you need to start conforming your drive, your direction into the direction where he's going.
Yes.
And so that's where we're at. If this is where God wants to take his people, and that is Jew and Gentile together as one, with the kingdom that looks and operates and functions a lot more Jewish from our traditional Christian perspective, it's going to look a lot more
faith.
Jewish than we think it will probably, or what we may be comfortable with. Then we need to start understanding, okay, what is it going to look like? What is our role in it? And what do I have to change in my life on this journey to get there?
Yeah.
Because I don't want it to be a shock or a massive conformity change. It's like, okay, you're going to do this, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on. Yeah. That's kind of like,
God doesn't want that either.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't want his people to be clueless.
That's why he's teaching us now. And
I liken it to, like, if there's a production of a play, and you've been in the production all along. Maybe you've been like one of the lighting people or the staff or the support staff, and all of a sudden one of the lead actors gets sick, and they point at you and they say, "You get in there, fill that acting role," and you're like, "I don't even know the lines. I don't know the songs. I don't know anything," and you'd be a mess. Well, what if you know that, oh, by the way, there's an opportunity. You may have the opportunity to play this part in the production, in the play. So please start learning the lines. Please start learning the songs. And you're like, I don't need to know that stuff. Well, guess what? If that day comes, you're not ready for it. And I for one, if I know that
that day's coming,
that day is coming when you're going to need to know what your role and what your purpose and your function is in the kingdom of God. And we understand that by studying his Torah, by studying the feasts. The feasts in a lot of ways are training.
Yes.
So dress rehearsals is one of the concepts that it's understood as, to help you know and be able to recognize what's happening, when and how, and what your response is in the meantime. That's so much of where we're at.
And again, we operate in the church today as if the Reformation is over, as if God is done reforming the church to get it where he wants it to be. If that were the case, we would all be on the same page already.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, the Reformation is not over. God is still teaching his people something. And the Jewish people being grafted back into their cultivated olive tree is that final piece.
It's essential.
Whether we want to see it or admit it or not, they are the final piece.
Mm-hmm. And we like to know, we understand, we've joked, or at least I've joked about this for a while, that we know that when Messiah comes, when he comes back, all the denominations, all the different church things, we all know that he's going to have to correct us on some things. We know that every church, no church is doing any of it right. Perfectly. No church is straight and narrow down on the path of what God would have for his people. We just assume that the way we do it is better, and that he's going to have to correct everybody else more than he's going to have to correct us. That's the assumption that we typically make. Yes, we know he's going to correct us, but he's going to correct them more. And somehow we feel better about that. But the reality is the means to which he's going to correct us is right here. It's in his word.
His word is the standard.
This is what it's going to look like. And so when studying the kingdom and studying the feast, we'll have a better understanding of this is what we need to know. And so let's start turning our life in that direction while we wait and while that we anticipate that day coming.
And it's on that note that Paul comes back in verse 33.
We skipped 32. We haven't got to 32 yet. For God has shut up.
Already.
No, I didn't. For God has shut up all in disobedience, so that he might show mercy to all.
Yeah, you didn't.
Yeah. So I didn't read that one yet, because he's because of the mercy shown to you Gentiles, they, the Jewish people, might also receive mercy. Because guess what? You've all been disobedient. That goes back to what he says earlier in Romans, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It's not one or the other, it's both of you. For God has shut up all in disobedience so that he might show mercy to all.
I'm sorry, I just had a picture of a parent with, say two children say, you're both going to your room.
Yeah. You're both getting a whipping.
Of you.
Yeah. I don't care who started it. You're both in trouble. It's one of those kind of things. But yeah, then verse 33.
Yes. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and how incomprehensible his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord of Adonai, or who has been his counselor, or who has first given to him that it should be repaid to him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen.
Amen.
What a doxology.
Mm-hmm.
No one can fathom the things he has in store for his people. That cultivated tree is going to look more beautiful than we can ever imagine. And
it's not about us. It's not about the Jewish people. It's always about him.
It's about him. And it will be made up of both of us, Jew and Gentile, together as one tree, one faith, with one Lord and one God. That's it.
Yep, that's it. It's not any more complicated than that.
So,
anyway, that's Romans
chapter 11.
And we're right at 7:00, so I think we're on a good stopping point. So just again, thank you all for joining us and watching all of this. We've got them posted here on our Restoration Fellowship Facebook page. I'm slowly getting them all added to our website, www.restorationmessiah.com. And so we'd love to hear from you. Put your comments or questions down at the bottom so we can address them if something doesn't make sense. And always, you can always send me an email or something. It's pastorkelly@restorationmessiah.com. But we're looking forward to getting everything back and back in fellowship with one another in person. We meet over at First Baptist Church in Morristown. If you're in East Tennessee or you're nearby or even passing through, we'd love to have you stop in and say hello. So again, the Shabbat is almost over. We've got about another hour and a half or
something like that.
So of the Shabbat, the day of rest, and again, even the Sabbath rest is a picture of the kingdom.
Yeah, hold on to it as long as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
And so, anyway, that's all we have for tonight. Hopefully, we'll see you again tomorrow night. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and just may He continue to shine on you. That's what we need.
Amen.
All right.
All right, y'all.
Shalom, everybody.